So Sonali,
All right.
we talked about 9 weeks ago, and at that time, a lot of the conversations were all the shifting left and FinOps going beyond cloud and all these things. And when we got on our prep call a couple weeks ago, you mentioned that we should change the questions, which we did at the last minute, to be more about tokens in this area.
Correct.
So I'm looking forward to digging in that area. Before we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about your purview at MetLife?
Yeah. So I'm a senior vice president at Global Technology at MetLife, and my remit spans across cloud, AI, developer tooling, DevSecOps, enterprise architecture, and technology governance. This is where FinOps sits. And we operate, MetLife operates across 40 countries in 6 different regions, so it's truly a global remit.
Awesome. So as you work across those areas, and you were sitting in the exec forum yesterday with a lot of your peers,
Yes.
what were some of the top takeaways that you heard in that room?
First thing I'll say is the conversations were very real and very practical, right? So, and what I realized is that most of us are dealing with the same problems, the same questions, and the AI value conversation is now happening, and I think Ishita said this, is not just happening at the CIO and CFO level, the CISOs are getting in the act as AI and security starts to intersect. The other thing I kind of took away from those conversations was that there is a specific need for a vendor-neutral standards. A lot of the frontier AI model providers are coming up with different models. A lot of us are trying to deal with how do we create our own cost frameworks? How do we measure value? So I feel like there is a need for a vendor-neutral standards and frameworks, and this is where I think the Tokenomics Foundation can play a big part to help all of us.
It does feel eerily similar to like 2017
Yes.
cloud, where none of this was defined and everything was
Absolutely.
inconsistent.
Absolutely.
It's interesting you mentioned about other types of leaders getting involved. One of the conversations I keep hearing from people in the exec forum rooms is FinOps area and stuff used to be just, the VP, SVP, and now suddenly as we get into tokens and AI value and AI spend, our CEO is asking about this, our boardroom's asking about this, and for me in my journey toward this tokenomic world was realizing just how much of the Fortune 100 leaders I spoke to said this has become a board level concern.
Yes.
So for you, at your organization, which is large and regulated, how would you define this emerging thing, this tokenomics concept? What does that look like?
I think for me, I look at it as a way to manage cost, consumption, and value of AI tokens. And really, what is all of that spend, all of that consumption, what value is it driving, and what business outcomes is it producing?
Okay, so I'm gonna throw you an unplanned curveball question then.
Okay.
Is it different than FinOps?
I think it has different dimensions.
Okay.
It adds more dimensions to FinOps,
Okay.
to standard FinOps.
Okay. So as we talk about tokenomics in your organization, how is that playing out right now? What does it look like in effect?
It's definitely playing out, and it's top of mind. But at MetLife, we're looking at it in 3 stages. And a lot of the speakers that spoke here before kind of touched on these areas. First one is consumption visibility, right? We're seeing AI consumption happening from whether it's your own internal AI platforms, whether it's SaaS platforms, or vendor APIs. There's so many different vectors to where consumption is coming from. And the instrumentation, that unified view of getting visibility does not come out of the box, right? So we're focusing a lot on instrumentation to get that visibility, right? Once you have the visibility, then the question is, are we using AI efficiently? Then it comes to optimization, right? So there's a couple things we're doing there is the pace at which new models are being released, as you guys know, it's not weeks, now it's days. But we're looking, and that's where the model routing architecture comes into play, in the sense where that the conversation, thankfully, is shifting from, are we using the latest and greatest model, to are we using the right model for the right task, right? And that requires instrumentation of a more efficient model routing, so that intelligence is built into our platforms itself to make the decision in terms of the cost context to what model to route to. The other things we're doing is in terms of building evals. like this decision, the trade-off between cost, performance, and accuracy is not an afterthought, right? We're shifting it left to at design time to allow our engineers and our business partners to make those decisions up front and make sure that we're keeping that cost context in mind, not after implementation, but right at inception. So that's optimization. And the third thing is value realization, right? How do you tie token spend to business outcomes and business value, right? How do you answer, at my level, how do we answer the questions like, not only how much are we spending on AI, but what value, how much is that spend generating in terms of efficiency and in terms of revenue? And this is not easy, right? This requires a lot of correlation of data across different systems to make those tie-outs between what is your consumption to value realization.
Well, you said the question in there, which is how do you tie token spend to value? And one of the things that I've noticed a lot of the conversations coming back to, which is FinOps deja vu all over again, is unit economics.
Yes.
Because in a lot of ways, we're seeing AI be used for customer-facing uses and applications, which should tie to some form of business outcome, that cost per blank. So you asked the question, how do you tie it? Like, how are you starting to tie those unit economic connectors of business value back to those costs?
I will say that, when we started looking at AI, we kind of started in the efficiency framing first, because that was the easier place to start. And when you look at efficiency, there is a baseline, right? You have a process that was running for X number of hours. Now AI can automate that process and bring that cost down by 40, 50, whatever percentage. So there's a baseline and there's a credible business case and value that it can be associated with it. Now, as we're starting to see these use cases move from efficiency to more growth or revenue oriented, it's becoming a little bit more tricky, because the question now is, AI is allowing us to do things that we weren't able to do before. So there isn't a baseline, right? In that case, it's how we're looking at it is our value hypotheses. So we start with the value hypotheses. We're doing structured, kind of time-bound pilots. And then through those pilots, right up front, we define what success looks like, and we measure our leading indicators in terms of what that, how that pilot is either confirming our hypotheses or not confirming our hypotheses. And I think that has worked well for us in terms of just kind of proving how, from a value standpoint, whether a certain technology is able to meet the value hypotheses or not. And the other thing it has done is it's also we've moved away from these pilots that run forever, and it's gotten us to a point where the pilots are either producing results, or we move on to something else. So it's given us that flexibility as well.
So one of the things Ambed talked about in the last talk was splitting out the two types of AI. And we heard this a bit in the exec summit, which was there is the developer productivity, developer assist side of things. And then there is, of course, the product AI. And we hear a lot about, the day one thing about the, people hitting 3x their spend unexpectedly coming from developer productivity. But we're also increasingly seeing companies are saying, there's a set of end user behaviors in our products that are driving our product AI spend. And it reminds me a little bit about, and to your point of new use cases, new value we're pulling out, when we were talking about cloud migrations 5, 7, 10 years ago, a lot of it was rehosting. It was like, let's get out of this place and go to this place. And everybody talked about refactoring and modernization, but a lot of the times people were just lifting and shifting. And so I think one of the interesting challenges we're hearing about is, are we using AI in the right ways for the right things to get value out, and not just using it for something that we could have done in a different way before? So this whole concept that was also in that last talk of, I think, almost workload classification to make sure we're using the right model for the right thing. You mentioned shift left. How are you shifting left that conversation and classification to say we're using AI for something that actually drives net new value instead of just a more expensive way to do machine learning?
Right. I think FinOps in general, if you think about, FinOps, right, the conversation about FinOps right at the beginning yields value. If you think about FinOps and the cost once you've made those decisions, once you've signed those contracts, or once you've implemented these platforms suboptimally, then it becomes an afterthought, and you come around and you have to remediate. With AI, it's the same thing, right? How do we, as I mentioned, with these evals, we're trying to put the cost context, the decision-making, the trade-offs between cost, performance, and accuracy right at design time, so our business partners and our engineering teams are able to make the right choices as they're building these solutions rather than after the implementation and when the chargebacks come through, right? That's never a good place to be. So that's one example of how we're shifting left and having these decisions right up front.
So one of the first times I heard anyone say the word tokenomics to me, I was at a global CIO event, and there were 3 CIOs, and they were all from giant financial organizations. And one of them was saying that from their CEO, they're hearing speed, speed, speed when it comes to AI. And this global CIO, she said, well, my job is to say speed, 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 and security. Speed, 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 and efficiency. Speed, 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 and value. So what is the impact of this tokenomics work for you internally on speed and scale of AI, which is now a critical existential board level conversation? Yes. How do you not slow the pace of innovation with tokenomics?
Yes. Yeah, and I can tell you that pressure is real. And the instinct to say slow down because we need to get this right, that is also real. So I'll tell you that it's like top down, and as JR mentioned, the CEOs want to go faster. They want us to innovate more and scale AI. The CFOs are asking, how are you going to generate efficiencies to fund more investments in AI, right? CISOs are asking, hey, are we comfortable with the control environment that we have as we're starting to scale this? And then there is bottoms-up pressure in terms of democratization of AI tools, right? AI is not just for, these tools are not just for engineers, they're for everyone in the company. So that pressure is, if you like, colliding, and it's really falling to the CIOs, the technology leaders like myself. And the key is for us to balance, not only balance the speed, because speed is required, but balance speed with governance, and how we building governance into our platforms that allow us then to go faster, but still within the guardrails, where the guardrails are still built into the system. So to answer your question, balancing speed and governance to create value is how I look at.
One of the things that does feel really different right now is historically we've managed growth in cloud or anything else through a set of engineering controls. Right? You have your hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of engineers spinning up cloud resources. And as you mentioned now, it's a different set of people. I mean, at the Linux Foundation, after the engineering teams, I think some of the most aggressive consumers of AI and spenders is the legal team. Right? And it's amazing to see that. But you've got marketing teams and sales teams and customer success teams. So what does that look like in a world where technology leaders and CIOs are used to governing just engineers, where you've got to roll out policies to all these other non-technical users, and again, recognize that they might be using the AI for really business-changing, impactful, transformational items. So how do you reconcile that so broadly?
Right. I think the key thing is not to stop experimentation, right? Not to constrain people from using the tools, but also build the guardrails in the system, build the spend limits in the spend caps within your systems. And it's a constant education in terms of where should you use AI versus not, right? When does a more deterministic rules-based engine makes more sense and is the right solution versus using an LLM, a probabilistic LLM, to make that decision. So I feel like it's a balance between the two, and we're kind of treading that balance as well at MetLife as our user base is growing and the interest to use more and more tools is growing as well.
Excellent. Yeah. So you mentioned model routing. That's coming up a lot.
Yes.
I've heard people building model routers. I've heard a lot of vendors talking about selling them. Are you looking from the top at saying we're going to define a allowed set of models? Are you picking vendors? Are you doing any tiering of, hey, these principal engineers get to use 5.0 Fable, but the marketing folks get this level and sales folks get a different level. Are you looking at it that way?
Yes, in fact, all of the above. What we're looking at is kind of persona-based selection, where you have engineers that are working on complex things. We're giving them the choice to have the reasoning model, the most expensive reasoning model. But at the same time, you have someone in marketing or legal that we know kind of based on their workload classification, we're making the decision, being more prescriptive about the choices that we're offering there. And, but at the same time, from an experimentation standpoint, we're not constraining anyone from using AI, but being more thoughtful in terms of building those guardrails and the guidelines in for what type of workload is best suited, or what model is best suited for what types of workloads.
So I want to double click on something you said earlier about balancing speed and governance. I feel like there's a pendulum swing happening in the industry, and I mean, we saw it in some of the examples I gave yesterday in the day one keynote. There's an iron triangle almost of speed and governance and value, good, fast, cheap, all these things. Like, are you setting a target for where you need to be for the whole org? Is it changing, as things evolve day over day? I mean, every day we turn around, there's a new model. Is it team by team? How do you balance those things?
Yeah, I think it's a constant balance that we're trying to achieve, and it also depends on the problem at hand, right? Not everything needs speed. In some cases, you need to be careful. Like some of the areas where we really differentiate, underwriting, for example. We want to make sure it's accurate, right? So efficiency is more important. It's not about going fast, it's about getting it right, right? So that's the trade-off there, where in some cases, speed is more important. So I would say it's based on the problem at hand, and how do you strike that right balance between speed and efficiency. But for engineers like us, how do you make sure that the underlying governance still supports both speed and efficiency?
Okay, so I guess last question for folks who are out there in this type of role, leading it. What's the thing people need to be doing like right now to prepare for the inevitable CEO question of how are you managing the tokenomics? How are you managing this AI spend, this value? What's the thing that you think is most important at this moment in time?
I think the first thing is get visibility into what AI, how you're consuming your AI tokens. As I mentioned, consumption is happening from different places. Get a handle on, you can't govern what you can't see. So the first thing is to be able to gain that visibility. And then in terms of how you make your usage more efficient, you have to build those guardrails into your platforms, right? And give the visibility and the trade-off decisions to your business partners, to your engineers, so they can make the right choices. And then ultimately, we're doing all this, we're using AI to generate value. So remember, it's all about generating value, so that balance between speed and governance, the ultimate goal is to meet business outcomes and to generate value for the company.
Amazing. Well, I feel like we're in a really interesting moment in time. Someone this morning, 5:30, coffee downstairs, was like, you're really lucky that you had your conference in June, because this was the right moment to have this conversation. Yes. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what we hear from you next year, as the whole world, I think, will be very different.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your time, Sonali.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.